Hello and welcome everyone to a special event here at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies here in Washington, in placid Washington, D.C. Nothing to worry about, nothing to see here. We're here at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg Center, and I tell you, I'm very excited about this program. We have two really well-known, prominent experts on the region, and we have a fascinating topic and lens through which to talk about dynamics in the region. And that is here to my right, Professor Vesko Garčević, and to my left, Professor Kenneth Morrison. And in a second, I'll just introduce them very briefly and mention their new book, and we're going to dive right into it. If you'll permit me here, just some context as we begin this conversation about the Balkans. So many people will say, with all that's going on in the world, who cares about the Balkans? You know, that's yesterday's problem. Well, that's actually not true at all. And as we'll hear from, if I may, Vesko and Kenneth later, we're going to talk about the dynamics in the region, and they're of great concern. And let me tell you, as we speak here today, I think literally as we speak, because it's 6 hours later in Montenegro, the basically the EU's foreign minister, Kaja Kallas, former prime minister of Estonia, you know, a country bordering Russia and that's otherwise all about Russia, Ukraine. Guess where she is today? Who knows where Kaja Kallas is today? Montenegro. In Montenegro, thank you. See, SCICE students, totally on top of it. Exactly, she's in Montenegro today. She's going to Bosnia-Herzegovina all day today, and then Bosnia-Herzegovina, and then Albania. And just last month, NATO's Secretary General, just prior to coming here to Washington to meet President Trump, where was he? Bonus question. He was in Bosnia-Herzegovina and Kosovo. And Secretary General, the NATO Secretary, just prior to coming here to Washington to meet President Trump.
I have no idea.
Where was he? Bonus question. He was in Bosnia-Herzegovina and Kosovo.
Okay, it's from this computer. It's now dealt with. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so we got rid of the echo. And I'm very pleased to say, if you can show the photograph, just one quick photograph. This, in addition to the Deputy Secretary General, the Secretary General, Mark Rutte, his visit, along with him in Kosovo, was Deputy Secretary General Radmila Shekarinska, former Defense Minister of North Macedonia. And just 1 week ago today, demonstrating NATO's focus on the Balkans. Just last Monday, the 31st of March, we were in NATO headquarters. That's a picture. There you can see Deputy Secretary General Shekarinska on my left, and to my right are two SCICE students, Mate Sekulic and Anna Fratzivir, who's in Bologna. And Mate hopefully will join us shortly. And to those in our back, those are youth leaders from across the Western Balkans. And here are Mate and Kaja. And Kaja was at our visit in NATO in December, meeting Deputy Secretary General, and Mate was just there now in the same meeting. And so the alliance is very much focused on the Balkans. And so are we here today. And with that, I want to, again, welcome our two prominent experts, and to say that the occasion for this, the happy occasion for this event, is the book that the two of them have just co-written, published just this year in January, Montenegro and Serbia, A Velvet Divorce. I've read the introduction, so I won't be the spoiler. I know the answer to the question, that they've put. But it's a fascinating approach to understanding the region. And as I mentioned before, Montenegro is an ideal lens to look at the region. If you saw on our invitation that FPI program coordinator Bren Kessler put out, that very attractive announcement, you could see Montenegro borders 5 Western Balkans countries. 4 of them are the WB6. The only WB6 country that Montenegro doesn't border is North Macedonia. And the relationship of Montenegro with each of its neighbors, particularly Serbia, is quite revealing. And the nature of how Montenegro became independent and the current dynamics of rather uneasy dynamics between Montenegro and Serbia that continue to this day are also quite revealing and have a lot of impact on and portent on the region. So with that, Professor Morrison, Professor Garčević, welcome. Who would like to begin? Go ahead, Kenneth.
Please. To begin. Firstly, before I start, just to say what a pleasure it is for me to be here at Johns Hopkins. This is actually only my 2nd time in the US, the first time in Washington, DC. So to be here talking to you about the research that we've been doing, and actually the research I've been doing not just on Montenegro, but on the Western Balkans for almost 3 decades now. So it's really a pleasure to be able to share some of that with you today. The main focus is going to be on Montenegro and Serbia and the relations between Montenegro and Serbia, which have been at times very complex. When I started studying the region, I remember reading these books that basically said Serbs and Montenegrins are the same people, or a strikingly similar variant of the same people. But a lot's changed. Yugoslavia in 1992. Although Montenegro remained in federation with Serbia and the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, a short period, joint states of Serbia and Montenegro, the trajectory of Montenegrin politics changed significantly during this period. And there's a couple of key moments that I want to kind of, to provide you with some context to understanding how we got to where we are today. When the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia disintegrated in the 1990s, only 2 republics remained in union.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Your mic is.
Oh, isn't it? Yes. I can hear myself now. The Republic of Yugoslavia was created in 1992 as the rest of the state seceded essentially from the center. That was a really unusual country because it was firstly the only 2-member federation in the world. Secondly, it was an asymmetric. Things began to change after the signing of the NATO agreement, which brought the Bosnian War to an end in November 1995. We began to see strains emerge between Kosovo and Serbia. One party called the Democratic Party of Socialist in Montenegro eventually collapses and divides into 2. The DPS split in 1997 as the East Groups of the
I'm sorry to keep doing this. We are having some sound issues with the live stream.
Okay.
Switch this mic.
Okay, let's hope this all works smoothly from now on. When the Belgrade Agreement was signed in 2002, there was quite an appetite by that time for Montenegrin independence, but it didn't have the support of the European Union at that time. But Milo Đukanović, who was then president of Montenegro by that time, he made a very clever strategic decision. He basically said, I will sign the Belgrade Agreement, but there's going to be a moratorium on independence. Within 3 years, we can have an independence referendum. And that's more or less what happened. By 2006, the ground had been prepared for the independence referendum, which took place on the 21st of May, 2006. Interestingly, and I come from the UK, we've experienced Brexit in 2016. One of the problems with Brexit was that the threshold was 50% plus one vote. And you ended up with actually 51.8% of people voting for Brexit. And that's not a very significant majority. And what it's caused is really serious political divisions in the country. Now, the European Union, who brokered the Montenegrin referendum, understood that Montenegro was a divided society at that time. And if there was to be independence, it had to be recognized at over 55%. The threshold was set at 55%. The eventual result was 55.4% voted in favor of independence, the rest for union with Serbia. So then in 2006, Montenegro enters into a completely new period as an independent state, bearing in mind it had been independent before, between 1878, the Congress of Berlin, and the end of the First World War, when in fact Montenegro became the only victorious country in the First World War to lose its statehood. And it lost its statehood in 1918. It was absorbed into the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, later the Kingdom of Yugoslavia. So Montenegro regains its independence in 2006. And what begins to happen is we see this real divergence between Montenegro and Serbia. And this is really the focus of the book. Montenegro sets its own trajectory in terms of its foreign policy. It declares, of course, that it wants to join the European Union. That ambition is absolutely still there. That ambition, indeed, is quite close, and it's something we can talk about maybe a bit later. The chances are that Montenegro are going to be the next country to join the European Union before any of the other Western Balkan six, so-called. But there's also been, and we saw in 2020, after 30 years of DPS rule, the party of Milo Đukanović, there was a big shift in 2020. And it all came down to something called the Law on Religious Freedoms, where the Montenegrin government at that time decided that the Serbian Orthodox Church, which are a very powerful body in Montenegro, had to essentially declare their assets. They had to, align with this Law on Religious Freedoms. What then happened is you had these so-called litiae, these protests that took place throughout Montenegro, led by the Serbian Orthodox Church. And in the context of the litiae and immediately after, the opposition in Montenegro were able to win. And by the way, before 2020, the Montenegrin opposition were terribly fragmented. They could never unite. And one of the things the DPS were really good at wasn't necessarily governing, it was splitting the opposition and making them unelectable. So everything changes in 2020. And since 2020, we've had a kind of series of slightly chaotic governments. It's a bit more stable at the moment. As I say, Montenegro is heading towards European Union membership. It joined NATO in 2017. But what's also happened post-2020 is there's been almost a kind of convergence between Montenegro and Serbia. The relationship has begun to change post-2020, and we can go into that in some detail in the talk today. So that's really basically the context of the book. We're looking at the period between the early 1990s, the disintegration of the Yugoslav state, all the way up to the present day, as Montenegro stands on the verge, potentially, of EU membership.
Kenneth, thank you for that expert background, very clear background as to the trajectory, how Montenegro became independent back in 2006, and the dynamics is divergence. Now, one of the key points here, and you just ended with it, is about the EU membership. So I want to ask Professor Garčević, what about that point of divergence? Is this really a point of divergence? Because nominally, Serbia is also an EU candidate, hasn't really progressed that far, but nominally it's an EU candidate. So why is this a point of divergence? And if you can speak to the specific question that everyone talks about when I go there, including in January, which is the role of the Speaker of Parliament, the President of Parliament, Andrija Mandić. So if you can address that.
Thank you, Ed. I just want to begin with thanking you for organizing this event. I'm glad to be here. First time is in this building. And I also want to thank all of you who have managed and who have been in person here despite such a lovely weather outside. Thank you for this courageous move and deciding to spend time with us this morning. Indeed, the question of European Union enlargement is something that is around for so many years. Just a brief look back, and I will then focus on the current development. You know, when in 2003, European Union decided to grant European Union membership future to the countries from the Western Balkans, or for the Balkans, it was a different moment, different geopolitical moment for Europe, and European Union also saw itself differently at the time, saw itself as a healthy organism which expands, and by this expansion grants security and stability on European continent. That has been changed over time, and geopolitical situation has changed, and changed also in Montenegro and in Serbia. So though they, as you said, put this objective, European Union membership, as one of the most important foreign policy objectives since the Thessaloniki summit in 2003, that we can notice the difference in approach between the two countries and how fast they embraced democratic reforms. I don't want here to, say that Montenegro is a bright example which has done all the reforms well. We know that it was a problem. We can discuss this in more detail later on if you want. And there were ups and downs. I can actually detect or speak about three phases in the approach of Montenegro towards this. But now we are in this moment because of external factors rather than development in the region. External factors, first of all, the war in Ukraine. European Union is waking up at one moment and turned back to the Balkans and recognizes that it really enlargement matters, and enlargement and the Balkans matters. And trying, hopefully, to finish the process. In that process, at least it stands now, Montenegro somehow sticks out as a good pupil who can be taken in the coming years. And some people in our government, current government in Montenegro, including Speaker of the Parliament, actually are often seen internally and in the region, and by some also European officials, as those who have double agenda. While in the European Union, for example, traveling to Paris, they have one rhetoric, and speaking about European Union membership as an ultimate goal of Montenegro. Back home, with their political agenda, they in fact have been actively trying to undermine this goal, actually to slow down Montenegrin approach towards European Union. Often it is in the eyes of experts in the region and practitioners, often they see connection between elements of current government in Montenegro with Serbian politicians, particularly with President Vučić, who through those people who are more loyal to him rather than Montenegro, trying to reshape the momentum and slow down a Montenegrin path towards a European Union. When it comes to that party that you mentioned, and where the Speaker of the Parliament is one of the, let's say, leader of this coalition, we see very interesting dynamics currently in Montenegro. One of the coalition leaders is very vocal in providing support to Vučić, and very vocal in providing or supporting or standing for pro-Russian agenda, and even calling for, a couple of days ago, calling for Montenegro to sign an agreement, a security agreement, along with Serbia and Hungary. The other one, Mandić, keeps himself, I would say, purposely low on the radar, political ladder, trying to play a role of a good cap, though they belong to the same party. But in fact, if you look at what they really do, then that policy, in my view, is dragging back Montenegro in this very moment. One more point when it comes to Europe. Yeah?
Let me take the mic.
You'll need to trade that one.
Okay. Sorry, Vesko. Let me just stop because it's very important for our audience to understand this. Why would Serbia want to, and its agents, proxies, agents, whatever, in Montenegro, why would Belgrade want to slow down Montenegro's advance to the European Union if Serbia itself is a candidate? So that people could be wondering.
Yeah, the difference here is that in the approach towards the European Union membership, while Serbia, at least as I said, on official level, keeps this goal as one of the strategic goals of Serbia's foreign policy. In practice, it derails from that goal. Actually, doesn't pursue it sincerely. We can list number of examples. First one is that it doesn't align fully with the European Union common foreign and security policy. It didn't impose sanctions on Russia. Its cooperation with China is of different type than actually than what European Union wants to see in place. So then a level of democratic reforms in Serbia are lagging behind. Democratic reforms in Serbia are lagging behind those in, for example, North Macedonia or in Montenegro or even Albania. So therefore, this actually puts Serbia in a back seat when it comes to enlargement. At the same time, one of the issues that Serbia has with Montenegro is that it's difficult to accept that Montenegro can be first in the line for the European Union membership, and often sees Montenegro as just another Serbia's state, and wants Montenegro to align with Serbia when it comes to Serbia's regional, for example, strategic goals, and that includes recognition of Kosovo or some other goals, which includes cooperation with Russia, or the role of Serbian Orthodox Church that we may discuss later on. So from that perspective, Serbia sees Montenegro as just an extended element, an extended entity of Serbia regional policy, not to say an extended ethnic entity, which means in terms of like identity of Montenegrins, which also is challenged by Serbia. So therefore, from that perspective, having Montenegro being in the line, first in the line to come to join European Union, may be seen or often is perceived by some let's say, important policymakers in Belgrade as a slap in their face, and something that will circle Serbia in the region and will leave Serbia without maybe supporter, ally that count on, and which will further isolate Serbia when it comes to its strategic goals in the region. Therefore, you know, they need and they rely on proxies that you mentioned in Montenegrin political spectrum, and some of them are now part of our government.
Thank you, Vesko. That was very clear. I'm going to come back to Kenneth now, and then I've failed in my moderator duties. At least you all have seen their full bios, but let me at least say here for the record and for those watching on the live stream, first, my name. I've neglected to mention my name, Edward P. Joseph. I teach here at Johns Hopkins SAIS School of Advanced International Studies. And let me just remind you this, that Professor Vesko Garčević is director of the Center for the Study of Europe at Boston University, and he brings this impressive diplomatic background. He was Ambassador of Montenegro in Brussels at NATO and Vienna Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, among other ambassadorial postings. And Professor Kenneth Morrison, who I'm going to ask you a follow-up question, Kenneth, is Professor of History, Chair in Modern Southeast European History, and Research and Innovation Director at de Montfort University. So again, these are highly credible academics that we have with us today. And Kenneth, let me follow up with this, because look, it's appropriate to focus on Serbia, because really that's your book is not just about Montenegro, it's about Montenegro and Serbia. So it's appropriate. And let me quote from the introduction to your book that you and Vesko had just put out. You write about the independence, Montenegro's independence back in 2006. You make the very interesting and overlooked point that independence declaration not only made Montenegro an independent country, it made Serbia an independent country, something often forgotten. And you wrote this, the two of you wrote this, that the referendum and the Declaration of Independence, quote, hit Serbia hard, as it came at a moment, quote, when Serbia was in the midst of internal political turmoil. Okay, fast forward to today. Serbia is in the midst of huge internal political turmoil. Now, Montenegro doesn't really figure into that directly, but does that turmoil at all affect dynamics between the two and within Montenegro?
Thank you. Yes, the short answer is it does, and I'll explain why. You are right that in 2006, I remember standing outside the Montenegrin Parliament building when Milo Đukanović was giving his speech, telling everyone that, you know, they'd reached the threshold that Montenegro was to become an independent state. And he started his speech by congratulating Serbia on their independence. And it's often overlooked that Serbia gained its independence in 2006 through a process that it didn't want. It didn't really wish for Montenegro to have that referendum. And of course, the relationship has been difficult thereafter. You're right that Serbia is, the moment most of you will know, and some of you will be following very closely, the situation throughout Serbia. It was initiated by the tragedy in Novi Sad, the collapse of this building and the killing, unfortunately, the deaths of those people in Novi Sad. But fundamentally, this is about corruption. People have had enough of corruption. And incidentally, when the Serbian Orthodox Church led these litias, these protests in 2019, lots of people who were involved in that were not necessarily terribly pious or supporters of the Serbian Orthodox Church. They'd had enough of what they perceived as corruption, DPS corruption, the party that had been in power for 30 years. They wanted a change. I've often said that Montenegro, it's a very small place, population of about 630,000 people, is not just a really useful lens to use to kind of understand the wider region, but it's often a bellwether for what later happens in other places. We think about the anti-bureaucratic revolution, so-called, in 1988, 1989. You know, much of this started in Montenegro before it spilled out everywhere else. Montenegro is a small place, but it's worth keeping an eye on political developments there because they're often a sign of what might be coming ahead of us. How this impacts Montenegro now, it's really interesting. Clearly, these demonstrations, although we've talked at length about this, I've talked at length with lots of policymakers and certainly with my own students, what's the end goal of the protests? The end goal, of course, is to get rid of the Serbian Progressive Party and the leadership of Aleksandar Vučić. It's a kind of anti-corruption. But what's not clear is how to achieve that. You know, the end goal, getting rid of Vučić, is a goal, but it doesn't propose anything for what the future might look like beyond Vučić. And that in itself has caused, I think, a little bit of doubt about what the future might look like in Serbia, where we might end up in Serbia, because those of you that watched the demonstrations, huge demonstrations in Belgrade a couple of weeks ago, and the alleged use of this sonic weapon, zvučni top, so-called, this weapon that was used against the students, and now I believe some Russian engineers have been brought in to determine whether or not this was actually used.
To determine that it was not used.
To determine that it was not used, obviously, yeah. I'm sure that will be the outcome. But it's also causing not just uncertainty in Montenegro, but in Bosnia-Herzegovina as well. Bosnia is feeling this possibly more than Montenegro, because the concern in Bosnia is that Dodik might be used as a way of creating some kind of artificial crisis in Bosnia that takes the attention away from what's happening in Serbia. And I think that is the danger, that Serbia is the most powerful country in the region. Everything kind of pivots around Serbia. You have to deal with Serbia because you can't really have security in the region without Serbia. Serbia can determine the fate of the region. And at the moment, things are looking quite unstable. They look quite febrile. We're not sure what could happen in Serbia and what the implications would be for neighboring countries, for Montenegro, for Bosnia and Herzegovina, obviously for Kosovo. Now we are, and we're sitting here in Washington, D.C., and some of the decisions that have been taken here over the past few weeks are going to have a significant impact upon the region. Just one alone, the decision to stop about 80% of US aid projects in the region is already having a very, very significant effect, primarily because lots of very good people who work in the NGO sector in Bosnia-Herzegovina or Serbia or Montenegro are now no longer employed. They have to go and find something else to do. And by the way, there's some really important work being done in the NGO sector in Serbia, in fact, across the region, that will be undermined or damaged. Now, some of those programs will be saved. The Norwegians may step in, the Dutch may step in, the British may step in, but a lot will be lost. And I think the Western Balkans is a hugely promising region, has a lot to offer, but we're not quite there in terms of the political stability that we would like to see. And there's no question at the moment we are, and the title of this presentation is, Montenegro and the Western Balkans in turbulent times. We are experiencing a little bit of turbulence at the moment, and we have to try and get through that turbulence to see what it looks like at the other end. What Vesko was saying, I think, is a very important point about Montenegro's EU ambitions. I suspect, primarily for geopolitical reasons, not because Montenegro is the poster child or the poster boy for EU accession in the region, but I think there's a geopolitical, geostrategic imperative now for the European Union to have Montenegro in. And I think Montenegro may join quite quickly within the next couple of years. And frankly, it's needed. And the reason it's needed is because there's an awful lot of doubt in the region, skepticism of the European Union and the accession, European Union accession. The European Union needs to show it's still a significant actor in the region and that the idea of accession is still alive. Because, of course, the last to join was Croatia in 2013. And there's the famous joke about the Croatian politician who was asked how it felt to join the European Union in 2013. And he said, well, it's a little bit like turning up at a party with a large bottle of champagne and everyone else is putting their coats on to leave. And Britain, of course, left the European Union 3 years later. So nothing has happened since 2013. And it's important, I think, that accession, Montenegro's accession, could be a very clear signal to the rest of the countries in the region that indeed their future is within the European Union. But again, there's a lot at stake at the moment. Nothing is certain, and we are living in this period of flux.
Couldn't agree with you more, Kenneth, about the importance of Montenegro advancing as an example and catalyst for the region. Let me, if I can, just mention a quote, a great quote. You mentioned Croatia joining 2013, the last country. I remember being at an event, a celebratory event in Washington. I'd come back from Kosovo on a visit. And the then Croatian ambassador to the United States, Joško Paro, spoke at SAIS. It was very jubilant, celebratory event, and he made this quote that I still remember, very far-sighted quote. He said, "Yes, we're very proud that we have made this journey, and today Croatia becomes a member of the European Union. But when our neighbor Serbia joins the European Union, that will be a great day in Croatian history." That's what he said, but unfortunately, there hasn't been too much progress on that front. And Vesko, that brings me back to the topic that you mentioned earlier, because it's not just a question of, let's say, subversive influence or malign influence from the political sector in Belgrade, but there's this active concern. I don't know almost any Montenegrin I've met who has not raised to me the topic and concern of the Serbian Orthodox Church. And these are people who are from various different political persuasions. They are by no means with only one political party DPS. There's not at all. These are people who are apolitical. Some of them are religious by their own definition, but they all reference this and point to the Serbian Orthodox Church. So what is the reality here? And how does the church manifest this influence in Montenegro?
Well, thank you for this question. Ed, I think we can organize the whole event about the role of Serbian Orthodox Church in the Balkans. I just want to, before turning to the all part of the world, which means, and particularly Serbia and Montenegro, I just want to make a couple of points and to put it in a context, to contextualize the role of Orthodox churches in the so-called Orthodox world. So, first of all, Orthodox churches are almost everywhere national churches, which means, and they historically contributed to the creation of those nations. So therefore, national identity is closely intertwined with those churches. And not just that, in most countries, if not all the countries that belong to that, let's say, Orthodox world, churches are integrated fully into political systems of those countries, and they shape to greater or lesser extent policies of those countries. Look at Russia or look at Serbia today. And this is called, in history, this is called as a Byzantine symphony or symphony of authorities. When church and state or those who are policymakers and church work together. So they share the same strategic goals and they work towards the same goal. The primary example is, for example, is Ukraine. If you want to see this, if you want to walk out from the region and look at Europe. So coming now to the Balkans, I would quickly just point out three segments or three layers of influence of the Serbian Orthodox Church, not just in Montenegro, but in the region. First, deals with identity and comes from what I just said. Second, deal is politics, which means political goals. And the third is cultural or narratives. So when it comes to the first, and when it comes to the first identity, since every church is national, Orthodox Church is national, therefore Montenegro has no national Orthodox Church, and therefore Serbian Orthodox Church represents Serbs, and therefore Montenegro is in fact Serbian land. You see the parallel in how Russia approaches Ukraine and why Russia and Russian Orthodox Church stood up against autocephality of Ukrainian Church and recognition of the autocephality of Ukrainian Church several years ago. When the autocephality was recognized, Russia called the meeting of their National Security Council. What does National Security Council of a country has to do with the canonic rights of autocephality of Orthodox Church? This is not a security question. This is canonical question among churches. Therefore, this actually illustrates how church and politics are intertwined in the Orthodox world. So in Montenegro, Serbian Orthodox Church is omnipresent. And then this is not the right moment now to speak about history of churches in Montenegro and whether Montenegro had autocephalous Orthodox Church or not when it had existed as an independent state in 19th century. So, but what is happening nowadays is that by its presence, it claims not just the land, but also identity of people who live in Montenegro. This is the first point. The second point is, as I just mentioned, is extension of Serbian politics. It shares the same strategic goals when it comes to the region and works towards those goals. One of those goals, as just explained, is that Montenegro may exist as an independent state, but should realign itself with Serbia and stand behind Serbian regional strategic goals as well as other goals that Serbia pursue. So Orthodox Church actively advocates that and actively participates in political processes in Montenegro, nowadays even more than before. And as a result of those popular movement that happened a couple of years ago, which was led and orchestrated by the Serbian Church in Montenegro. This is the second point. And the third point is cultural and other values. Serbian Orthodox Church, like Russian Orthodox Church, because it is not surprise, Serbian Orthodox Church is maybe the closest ally among Orthodox churches to Russian Orthodox Church. Stands for similar values and promotes similar values that Russian Orthodox Church promotes. Narrative goes around points that Orthodox values stand in stark contrast with so-called liberal values of European Union. When it comes to a number of things, family, gender rights, gender equality, rights of LGBTQ people, sexual orientation, and so on and so forth. So it argued that actually getting closer to European Union means departing away from what used to be a tradition, well-established tradition of Montenegrins or people who live in Montenegro. And it is also very active in it. And this narrative resonates well with people that you mentioned before who are now in the government of Montenegro.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, just to add to that, one of the proxy struggles that was taking place throughout the 1990s and early 2000s in Montenegro before independence was this struggle between the two churches. Because you had the Serbian Orthodox Church in Montenegro, but in the early 1990s, you had the reformation of the Montenegrin Orthodox Church. And this was not really a religious dispute. This was a dispute over identity, because as Vesko correctly said, Orthodox churches are linked inexplicably to nations. The Serbian Orthodox Church to Serbia, the Russian Orthodox Church to Russia. If there is a Montenegrin nation separate from Serbia, then it should have its own church. So actually, the struggle over identity that was taking place in the 1990s and early 2000s was being fought through the lens of the churches. And in Cetinje, a very small place, the old capital of Montenegro, you basically had the headquarters of both churches, the Montenegrin Orthodox Church and the Serbian Orthodox Church. And from time to time, on Christmas Eve, for example, when they burned the Yule log on Orthodox Christmas Eve, there would be clashes between supporters of the Montenegrin Orthodox Church and supporters of the Serbian Orthodox Church. So the struggle over orthodoxy or identity in Montenegro has actually been going on for a very long period. The Montenegrin Orthodox Church now are fatally weakened. I think you would agree with that, Vesko, that they were never a kind of strong entity, but now they've almost ceased to exist. The Serbian Orthodox Church has become much, much more dominant in Montenegro. You see, when you travel around Montenegro now, new Orthodox churches being built everywhere. I was in Plujene recently, and there's a huge new Orthodox church in Plujene, which is a very small place, which doesn't really require such a grand Orthodox church, but you can see the symbols of the power of the Serbian Orthodox Church everywhere in Montenegro. Vesko also made a very important point about what is Serbia's strategy vis-a-vis Montenegro. Serbia knows that it can't revoke Montenegro's statehood, reverse what happened in 2006. But what it's done quite effectively, particularly since August 2020, is to make Montenegro, where possible, align with Serbian strategy and Serbian strategic policy, that Montenegro becomes again a sort of second Serb state, which in Serbia, that was the perception that Montenegro was kind of an extension of Serbia. And those of you that know history will know that their interpretation of Montenegrins, well, Montenegrins were people who fled after 1389, the Battle of Kosovo. They, lived up in the mountains there around Cetinje, and they fought the Ottomans for 400 or 500 years. It was the cradle of Serbdom. It was the only flame of Serbian independence, was Montenegro's existence throughout the Ottoman period. So from a historical perspective, Montenegro is very important. It's significant for Serbia because it proves the continuity of Serbdom and Serb identity throughout the Ottoman period. So church politics, and that politics by proxy, we do write about this in the book, and I've written about it quite extensively before, was really where struggles over Montenegrin identity were taking place for long periods.
Kenneth, thank you for that. And I hope everyone else here registered the parallel when you spoke about the cradle. As Vesko reminded us with the Church and the Russian Orthodox Church, of course, the narrative of Russia towards Ukraine, and of course, Bulgaria towards North Macedonia. So they're very similar. This I use the term paternalistic. This you are our little brothers who have in this romantic a part of our history. So in similar noxious attitude towards the independence of a neighboring state. So let me ask you. I just want to turn directly onto Montenegro. One question about Montenegro qua Montenegro. And then we will open it up for your questions. Point blank, Vesko and Kenneth, how divided do you believe Montenegro and Montenegrin society is today? Do you believe that it's you see in Serbia you have these protests against Vučić, but there are also these very sharp societal divisions there. How divided is Montenegro today with the challenges you see Serbian Orthodox Church and Belgrade on the political and the desire to slow down the path to the EU? So how do you see it as very divided? And if you'll allow me to slip in just these two other points here, because we can have this conversation without mentioning that. how much do media narratives from Serbia exacerbate those divisions, or maybe the opposite? Maybe they persuade Montenegrins that, you know, we should be more aligned with Serbia. So I want to ask you that. If you, I'll save the last question, but that's enough for now. Please.
So Montenegro is a divided society, but you know, Montenegrin society has been really divided since 1992. There was a referendum, actually, the same weekend that the referendum took place in Bosnia-Herzegovina, February 29th, 1st of March 1992. There was a referendum in Montenegro. People don't tend to know this, but the referendum was about whether you wanted to remain, Montenegrins wanted to remain in union with Serbia or some other arrangement, possibly independence. Now, about 30% of the population didn't vote. They boycotted that referendum. But the rest of the population did vote, and they voted something like 94, 95% in favor of remaining in union with Serbia. If you look at the pro-independence parties in Montenegro in the early 1990s, what level of support did they have? The Liberal Alliance of Montenegro, at that time led by a very charismatic guy called Slavko Perović. Still relatively small numbers, 10%, 15% maximum. Montenegro's independence happened because the monolithic DPS split in 1997, and basically Đukanović used the political program of the Liberal Alliance to deliver Montenegro's independence. That happened during the 1990s. There was the DPS split, it was very febrile. There was the NATO bombing in 1999, again, very febrile. You had 2006, the referendum. You know, Montenegro has gone through various periods where it's been very, very divided. However, Montenegrins are pragmatic. All of these divisions exist. Sometimes they're quite heightened, sometimes they're less intense, but somehow they found a way forward historically. Those of you that know a little bit about history will know that when Montenegro was an independent state in the late 19th century, all the way up to the First World War, it was led by King Nikola Petrović, who died in exile after the end of the First World War. Montenegro in 1878, when it became independent, and again in 1912, after the first Balkan Wars, expanded into areas where the very idea of Montenegrin identity didn't really exist. In order to make this work, Montenegrins have always had to be pragmatic about their relationships, whether it's with Montenegrins having relationships with Serbs, Serbs with Montenegrins, Montenegrins with Bosniaks or ethnic Albanians, whatever it might be. The Montenegrins have always found a way to make this work. Yes, it's divided, but ultimately in Montenegro, is it in anyone's interests, even the people you were referring to, the Speaker of Parliament and others in Montenegro, that somehow appear to be undermining Montenegro's process towards the European Union? Is it in their best interests for Montenegro's independence to disappear? No. The reality is they find some way of publicly opposing each other and looking as if they're very divided in Parliament and so forth, but somehow agreeing on a way forward, somehow just fudging a way forward. And this is how I think it's going to be in Montenegro. You're always going to have those divisions, the divisions that go back to the end of the First World War between the so-called whites and the greens, those that were for unification with Serbia, those that were for maintaining Montenegro's independence. What happened during the Second World War and the splits between Chetniks and partisans, and again, Zelenaši Greens that set up their, under the aegis of the Italians at that time, a kind of independent state or attempted independent state around at Cetinje at that time. Those divisions will always exist. But I don't think they're a threat to Montenegro's statehood. I just think they're one of the social dynamics that absolutely we should be keeping a close eye on, but I don't think represent a significant threat to Montenegro's statehood.
Thank you, Kenneth. Very clear. I'm going to open it up for questions, and I'm going to, while you all are thinking of your questions, and I'm going to acknowledge someone first here. Let me sort of set the framework here. Maybe you can address this in addition to taking questions and as folks are thinking. And we welcome Professor Siniša Vuković to the conversation. Welcome. And so let me ask you this way, kind of one of the remarkable things about Montenegro in its independence and in contrast to the other countries of the region is the 100% reconciliation with Croatia. So I don't know that there's another example in the region of two countries that were at war that it's gone. It basically until recently, of course, until some recent revival of some historical things, and in which the hand of Belgrade was widely suspected. But other than that, it was really under President Đukanović, this was really full-scale reconciliation, not just at the society, at the government level, but among the people, among the population. And then second, of course, is you mentioned it, the recognition of Kosovo. And so my question is, do you believe that issue is settled in Montenegro? It's obviously not settled in Serbia. It remains, and people don't understand this, Serbia's #1 priority. Its #1 foreign policy priority remains isolating Kosovo. And this, if you see the weekly meetings, the visitors from Africa that come and from other countries. So do you believe that that's settled in Montenegro, or perhaps not? And do we have Linda? Is Linda here? No, we don't. Oh, we have. Okay, I wanted to acknowledge the Montenegrin embassy. I know Ambassador Mitrović very much wanted to be here, but he could not. He had to attend to another. Yes, here, and so I allow you to have the floor, and also I know North Macedonia is here, seated right next to you. So, would you care to say a few words, or it's enough?
So, for time being, yeah, like
okay.
Just, to thank you for this occasion and the lecture. So it was very interesting, and to have a recap of Montenegro history. And
yes, I'm gonna give the mic to Vesko, and then.
I was just yeah.
Okay.
I just wanted to make a couple of points in addition to what you have said about this divide in Montenegro. In fact, what we forget is the following: that Montenegro is not just about Serbia or Serbs and Montenegrins. That Montenegro is a multi-confessional and multicultural society where a number of ethnic groups live in harmony. That 17% of Montenegrin population are Muslims, and that there is a considerable Albanian group living in Montenegro, and also Croats live in Montenegro. And this what we consider as an issue is in fact appears as an issue between Montenegro and Serbia, or among Montenegrins and Serbs. Montenegro historically has never had a problem with other ethnic groups living in it. Even during the breakup of Yugoslavia and during the bloody war in Bosnia and Herzegovina or in Croatia, Montenegro managed to preserve its multicultural and multi-confessional character and respect among those peoples living in the country. So this is a legacy, in my view, a legacy for good regional cooperation that Montenegro has enjoyed its independence. And I can now turn to Kenneth to continue.
So yeah, I'll address the question of Croatia. Vesko will address the question of Kosovo. You're absolutely right that what happened quite quickly after Đukanović came to power is he began to, make soundings to the Croats to talk about some kind of apology, making some sort of formal apology and creating better relations between Zagreb and Podgorica, which he did quite effectively. But also within Montenegro itself, there's an interesting narrative about what happened in Dubrovnik. There's no question that Montenegrin political leaders, some of whom went on to become the drivers behind independence, were the people who in 1991 were encouraging Montenegrins to go to the border and participate in what happened in Konavle and Croatia. What's happened subsequently is that the whole narrative has been changed. The narrative is that this wasn't Montenegro's war against Croatia. This was the Yugoslav army that were fighting against Croatians against a very lightly defended Dubrovnik. This was imposed upon Montenegro. The reality is, of course, quite different. Some of the political leaders, Svetozar Marović, for example, who later became the president of Serbia and Montenegro, wrote a series of columns in the only newspaper at that time in Montenegro was Pobjeda. It was called Rat za mir, War for Peace. And it was basically creating the ideological justification for the attack on Dubrovnik. But what happened in the 1990s when Đukanović came to power post-DPS split, led the party through that period of the late 1990s, early 2000s, realizes that he needs Croatia's support. And within Montenegro itself, what happened in 1991 is not really discussed very much. A friend of mine, Kocha Pavlović, he died several years ago, but he made a film called Rat za mir. He documented using old, because some of those articles, for example, you can't find anymore in the archives. The pages have been torn out, or some of the footage has disappeared from the archives. But he managed to get what he could and make this really impressive document called Rat za mir about the attack on Dubrovnik. And you can see there's a direct correlation between what politicians were saying in the parliament and what people on the front who are being interviewed are saying. There was a responsibility on the behalf of the Montenegrin leadership for what happened in Dubrovnik. But the narrative shifted throughout the 90s and early 2000s. And now, what happened in 1991 is not really mentioned in Montenegro. It's not taught in Montenegrin schools. People don't necessarily know about it very much. They might be vaguely aware that it happened, but it's been quietly moved aside. It's not part of the narrative. So relations with Croatia are good, which is important. Montenegro has good relations with all its neighbors. The difficulty, and I'll pass on to Vesko to talk about this, of course, is that Montenegro, on the same day as Macedonia, as it was then, North Macedonia, now also recognized Kosovo, which was also difficult for Macedonia. Montenegro recognized Kosovo's independence. Declaration of Independence in February 2008, Montenegro recognized, I think, in October 2008. And that created a serious schism between Podgorica and Belgrade. And that's still very much a live issue. The issue over what happened in 1990s with the Croats, there are, in fact, still some things to be resolved, reparations and so forth. But on the whole, it's been resolved. The issue of Kosovo is absolutely a live issue and very much impacts upon the relationship between Belgrade and Podgorica. But I'll allow Vesko to go into more detail.
Okay, I will actually take this hot potato called Kosovo because I was born there, so it does a lot of that I will be the one. Though I will be the one to speak about that. I will begin quickly with an anecdote, recent anecdote when I traveled to Belgrade in December last year. So I was there, and now as an American citizen, I have a passport since I was born in Kosovo. Then it says President Kosovo. And then when I presented my passport to the police officer on the border in Belgrade at the airport, he was looking at the passport and said, "How come Kosovo is not independent? how come that Kosovo can be named here as a country where you were born? I said, this is not my business. I think that you have to explain to the Americans who have recognized Kosovo as an independent state, along with 100 and something states that have recognized Kosovo as an independent state. That actually speaks well about state of affairs in Serbia, because this issue is purposely kept on high on agenda to cover other burning issues that Serbia are supposed to address, or like corruption, lack of democratic reform, then lack of institutional independence, particularly judiciary or courts. So if Kosovo as an issue is removed from agenda in Serbia, then what is left? Serbia with its problems, and problems with its government, and problems with its people who are in power for so long. So therefore Kosovo has, Kosovo as such, and its independence is of particular importance for Serbian political elites. And therefore they keep it high on their agenda. And they use it also from time to time to stigmatize Montenegro when this is opportunist for them to do. For example, in cases just recently when President of Montenegro congratulated Kosovo's independence, this was used by government of Serbia to criticize Montenegrin president for doing that. Regardless of the simple fact that Montenegro recognized Kosovo long time ago, weeks or months after it declared its independence. This issue will never be removed and will strategically be used against Montenegro whenever, for any reason, particular political reason, Serbia needs it. Just to reflect on the time when Montenegro recognized Kosovo, because I was at the time working in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Montenegro. Similarly, with our decision to impose sanctions on Russia in 2014, right after the European Union, we were faced with the dilemma whether to do it and when to do it. So therefore, those people who were in charge to make decision about recognition, realize that it is not whether, but when. And if we want to pursue European Union foreign policy and want to become European Union member and NATO member, which were our strategic goals, we have to align with that policy. So therefore, it is when. And therefore, no matter how painful that decision was, we decided to do that as soon as possible, and to demonstrate in that way, not just that we pursue the European Union approach towards that issue, but also that by recognition of Kosovo, in the long term, we think we will stabilize the region, and we will contribute to the regional stability, because this will hope, as we thought at the time, this will remove an important issue from agenda in Serbia, and therefore we all will focus finally on what comes next, and this is how to democratize our countries and to come close to the European Union membership, which, you know, as I said before, Serbia, in fact, didn't do and use the issue of Kosovo constantly to blame Montenegro for.
Thank you, Vesko. We have a question. Take the mic, because then they can hear you on the live stream. Thank you, and say.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Gülgür from American University. I'm an instructor of peace and conflict resolution courses there, and I have a lot of my students. I brought them here today for this great conversation. Thank you so much. Very insightful. I have two questions, and one of them is about the evolution of national identity in Montenegro, and to what extent have Montenegrin elites worked to build a distinct national identity and legitimize their political agenda since independence. And the second one is more about, again, national identity, but also geostrategic alignment of Montenegro. So you started to talk about Ukraine and Russia. So of course, like we make some parallels between the two. So both Ukraine and Montenegro have worked to build independent identities following long histories of close ties with more dominant neighbors. So do you see a meaningful parallels between Montenegro's distancing from Serbia and Ukraine's from Russia? Are there lessons from the Ukraine-Russia conflict that apply or doesn't apply to Serbia-Montenegro relationship? Is there a risk of conflict you see? Thank you.
I'll take the first.
Okay.
Thank you very much for the question. It's a brilliant question, by the way. This is, I wrote my PhD on the role of political elites in nation and state building in Montenegro. And what happened there in the 1990s is that there was this real effort post 1997. It intensified towards 2006 to actually construct a much more significant Montenegrin identity. And this was done in various ways. It was done through the media. It was done through sponsoring historians that wrote from a particular perspective. The problem with this nation and state building in Montenegro was when independence was achieved in 2006, it more or less stopped. That project was executed with a very specific goal in mind, which was to attain independence. So that whole kind of process of consolidating Montenegrin identity really ended in 2006, 2007. The DPS should have continued to do what they were doing before the referendum, after the referendum. But what happened is that that stopped. Independence itself became, over a long period, perceived as a DPS project. People within the system benefited primarily from independence. And there was no longer this kind of drive towards consolidating a distinct Montenegrin identity. That process of nation building ended at that time. Now, I think that was a mistake because increasingly people came to think of Montenegrin independence as something that was delivered by a small group of political elites and in their interests. And that was a problem for Montenegrinism, the idea of being Montenegrin. You're right about living in the shadow of the volcano, if you like, that Ukrainians have tried to sort of develop their own distinct identity over long periods. There are similarities there with Montenegro. If you look at, even some of the literature from the late 20th century basically says, look, Montenegrins are Serbs, or a strikingly similar variant thereof. It really took a kind of nation-building effort in the late 20th century and beginning of the 21st century to consolidate Montenegrin identity. But I fear that when you have a census in Montenegro, as in other countries, people vote on the basis, or they declare their identity on the basis of who might be in power. We see big shifts in census data in Montenegro over the years. And I think that weakness that existed post-2006, the drive to consolidate Montenegrin identity has made Montenegro slightly weaker. The benefit of that, of course, is that what Vesko was talking about is that Montenegro is genuinely shared between Montenegrins, Serbs, Bosniaks, Albanians, Croats. They have to make it all work. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe it's not such a great idea for one nation to predominate within a multicultural and multi-confessional society, which Montenegro is. Maybe that balance in which it's not necessary to have a very strong Montenegrin identity, maybe that is going to work. And ultimately, what is Montenegrin identity today? It's a civic identity. It's the idea of belonging to Montenegro as it exists, not because you are a Montenegrin or a Serb and declare yourself as such in national terms. So the civic identity of the Montenegrins and of Montenegro is something that we need to preserve and strengthen, because that's Montenegro's only hope for the future, really. It needs to be a civic state. Do I see the potential for conflict between Serbia and Montenegro? I don't. I really don't see it. There's so much close relationships between people in Serbia and people in Montenegro. Everyone who in Montenegro has relatives in Belgrade or Niš or the other way around. It's I don't think there would be an appetite for such a thing, even when things were really difficult. In 1999, during the NATO bombing campaign, in 2006, during the referendum, we've avoided conflict. And at one time in 1999, you actually had two different groups of armed groups in Montenegro walking the streets in Podgorica. It was extremely tense during that period, and it didn't happen. So I don't see the potential for the kind of conflict that exists between Russia and Ukraine, for example. But Vesko, maybe talk about that.
Thank you. So then I will start where Kenneth stopped. Indeed, I don't believe that conflict is possible for a number of reasons. For ordinary people, for citizens, they can travel without passports, which means little changed for them, in fact. And that is the most important thing. Secondly, Montenegro has joined NATO, and if it joins the European Union in the years to come, those two layers, in fact, protect. Those are like two protection layers that will serve or save Montenegro, even if somebody, I cannot imagine that hypothetical situation, somebody wants to, let's say, have aspiration to reintegrate, let's say, call it, Montenegro into Serbian proper. But coming to your first question, I hope that we can agree, depending which actually school of thought we follow when it comes to nation building, that we can agree that nations are not fixed, actually identities are not fixed, and they are very dynamic phenomena. And the nations, as we know them today, are relatively new on this planet. So whether you go follow Benedict Anderson or Hobsbawm or Anthony Smith or Ernest Gellner, all of them speak about how nations have been developed over time, and particularly in the 18th and the 19th century. So therefore, from that perspective, Montenegrin identity is not a new identity. It's been around for centuries, but it has been shaped in current, let's say, shape in the through 19th century, the beginning of 20th century. So therefore, it is not lagging behind Italy. For example, Italian identity was formed in the 19th century and the 20th century. There is also deep divide, if you speak about Italy, among Italians living in the north, Italians living in the south. And if you know Italians well and you have friends among Italians, as I have many, then you will become very well aware of that divide that exists even today. So from that perspective, I don't see Montenegro being different. And finally, I can say one more thing, which also is recognized when it comes to identity development or nation development in Europe. Statehood history plays an important role for the formation of your national identity. And the statehood, Montenegrin statehood history, I would say, is the key for the development of Montenegrin national identity. And I don't want to repeat what Kenneth has said, why this is important for Serbia, because without, if I can use a word very popular here in the US culture, then I often feel that Serbia appropriates Montenegrin history to present it as its own, in order to fill in the gap between 14th century and the 19th century, because this is where the Serbian state didn't exist and was part of Ottoman Empire. So, but this will lead us to another discussion. Therefore, that identity is challenged, and I don't also question whether people can feel this way or another way. It goes and along different lines, including families. When you have, like my family, some of us feel very much Montenegrin, while some feel Serbian, or so on and so forth. I'm not challenging that. I just want to challenge those who doesn't allow Montenegrins to feel that way. And who, even if you say that I am such, they will turn to you saying, no, this doesn't exist. You are not, you cannot call yourself that way. This is just another name for Serb. This is what I challenge.
Vesko, thank you. And again, I think we can see some echoes in the way Macedonians are treated by Bulgarians. There's quite a similarity. I want to say something here I think is quite relevant. We have a question here I'm going to come to, but let me just flag this for you. And I want to quote from a prior book by Professor Morrison on this, because you brought up, Kenneth, and it's quite relevant to the ongoing crisis next door in Bosnia-Herzegovina, which we haven't talked about, and the Dayton Agreement, and all the tumult, the Dodik and the arrest warrant and so forth. So you in your prior book, you made the point that the identity was actually expressed by your position on independence. So the two were basically synonymous. So if you had an identity as a Montenegrin, you were for independence. If you had an identity as a Serb, this I'm reading is defining ethnicity, national identity was determined in large part by the individual's position vis-a-vis independence. And you made the point on 13 July 2004, the Montenegrin Assembly, then being boycotted by unionist parties, passed the controversial Law on State Symbols and Statehood Day, a concrete and legalistic step towards the crystallization of a more distinct Montenegrin state identity. And obviously symbols in the Balkans, these are very important. What I thought was a very important takeaway for those in Bosnia-Herzegovina who advocate and see the solution to get away from the Dayton Agreement and move towards a civic state was the spirit that Milo Đukanović approached this topic. So rather than what we see in, particularly in some elements in Sarajevo today, where this is adversarial, you're gonna be part of our civic state, and we're gonna have a civic state, whether you want one or not. The contrast of Milo Đukanović that you cited was dramatic. That you said that the clear advantage that the independence side, Đukanović had, was that it was less defensive than the movement for preservation. Their rhetoric had an air of renewal and positivity, and they quickly generated momentum. So,
it's true that at that time, and I think I wrote that 20 years ago or something, at that time, the Montenegrin independence movement was very positive, was looking towards the future. It wasn't looking backwards to preserve something. It was trying to convey a future that Montenegrins could have. And it did it really, really effectively. I mean, I remember during the referendum campaign, I think it was a company from Belgrade, a marketing company, that were recruited by the sort of pro-Montenegrin bloc to do all their campaigning. And it was really, really effective. And of course, this was about values as well, and appealing to young people in particular. You know, here's what we could have. This is what the future could look like. Or you can have the same old. And if you look at the people on the stage that were there representing the pro-unionist arguments, they were the same old group of people who had been there since the early 1990s or the late 1980s. What the pro-Montenegrin bloc or the pro-sovereignty bloc did really effectively is they casted this as a really positive thing to do. Vote yes. And isn't it better to vote yes than to say no to something? And they really made that feel very inclusive. Now, it's not a question that people who voted yes for independence didn't necessarily define themselves in national terms as Montenegrins. Some, I mean, before the referendum, there were some statements made by members of the Montenegrin government saying to civil servants, you can't work for the state and vote against it. So some people felt maybe they were a little bit coerced to vote the way that they did. But those values, the more progressive values that Milo Đukanović was talking about, and of course, all those years later, Đukanović is the past. You know, it was people with a different set of values that ended up kind of ending his political career. But at that time, what Đukanović was saying about the future, how he engaged with younger generations and particularly educated people, because there was this divide as well between those that were pro-union tended to be older, less educated and less urban. And those that voted for independence tended to be urban, more educated and younger. And of course, it then became a generational or a value-based issue. But again, you know, things changed. 20 years later, it looked very different. And people like Đukanović looked like the old men up on the stage. But look, there's something very positive about how this was delivered. The story of Montenegro's independence and how it was achieved without a shot being fired, without more than a few very heated debates in parliament and some parliamentary boycotts and so forth, it was delivered very, very effectively. I was there throughout the referendum period. The month before I arrived, I went to all the pro and anti-independence rallies, and then I was there for the day of the referendum itself. And it was incredibly well organized and incredibly well delivered. Montenegro demonstrated that they could be a state, that they were a state, that they had the capacity to be able to do that. But much of this was down to the fact that at the time, people in Montenegro, particularly young people, felt that they needed to move away from the dark days of the 1990s. And if independence was an option for them to do that, they were going to choose that rather than remain within a union with Serbia. The one other thing I will say, of course, that happened in 2003 that changed how a lot of Montenegrins viewed Serbia was the assassination of Zoran Đinđić. You know, Serbia looked like a pretty dark place in the months after the Đinđić's assassination and Operation Sabre and so forth. And I just think there was a sentiment in Montenegro that, you know, we need to move on from this. There was a lot of pragmatism. We talked about pragmatism earlier on, but I think there was quite a lot of pragmatism as well, that for many Montenegrins, being in the union with Serbia was actually causing them difficulties. It was not allowing them to move on, and perhaps independence would be a vehicle that would allow them to do that.
Kenneth, we have well, this will be the last question, and if you can work in, thank you, Kaya. If you can, maybe in working in, if there's anything you want to say about today's DPS and the role and the way people look at DPS with Đukanović and those current dynamics. And also, if you, I'm just trying to be complete here. This is the last of my that was on my list, was the attempted coup, the Russian-inspired coup, and whether that has had legacy, and also the fact that those convicted on that were then released, if that has had any lasting impact. Let's take this last question. Thank you.
You mentioned earlier that there was a policy dynamic between the government and the Orthodox Church of Serbia. In evolution of strategic policy, does one of them stray and the other one meet, or are they in more of like a perfect unison?
You know, the Serbian Orthodox Church appears at the surface as a very, how to say, unison, united entity that speaks with one voice. But in fact, within the church, but that is again another topic, there are different voices and different views how church, what the role of the church should be in current society, current Serbian society, whether the church should stand up and support, stand behind protests, ongoing protests in Serbia, or the church should stand behind the government, as it is the case right now. It is now maybe controversial issue to say that you don't know who controls whom in this tango for two. Often people believe that church is under control of state, because, and including some, you know, some senior officials, church officials, have some, I don't know, something from the past that states knows about, and therefore they is in control of them, or church in fact controls and shapes narratives, goals of that state must pursue. It's a very, very, how to say, difficult to decipher who is upper hand in this game or in this play. But what you can see, at least for the time being, that church and state work together, and those people and voices that within the church oppose that church attitude and approach are currently in minority, and they are somehow sidelined by the patriarch and other people who are actually running the church at this moment.
Just to answer very quickly the question about the church, or to add to what Vesko said, politicians have come and gone in Serbia and in Montenegro over decades and centuries. The church has remained the only constant, and it has an incredible political influence in Serbia, there's no question. Now, the church itself, of course, would say that it's not a political, it's never used as a political instrument, it's not involved in kind of daily politics. Of course, we know that's not the case. When things are serious, the church and the patriarch is often the person who is seen as the soul of Serbia or Serbs in the region. That person is rolled out to talk about these critical issues, not necessarily the president or prime minister. So determining exactly what the relationship is between church and state is difficult because we aren't there. We don't see those conversations that take place between Vučić and the patriarch. But there's no question that no Serbian politician can thrive without really having the backing of the church. You need the backing of the church. The church is the soul of the nation, and therefore it's eternal and it's seen as such. So it gives an immense amount of political power. What happened in Montenegro in 2020 with the Litier and then the opposition coming to power in August 2020, those demonstrations were led by the Serbian Orthodox Church. And I have to say it was done extremely effectively, which does lead me on to the question about DPS. The Democratic Party of Socialists had been in power in Montenegro. I mean, they were basically the successors to the so-called Montenegrin League of Communists that dissolved in 1990 and then replaced by the Democratic Party of Socialists. It just changed its name. There was a split in 1997 into a kind of pro-Belgrade and what became a pro-independence bloc. But for a 30-year period, the Democratic Party of Socialists, the DPS, were in power. And the thing about the DPS is it wasn't just a political party. It was a system. They really controlled everything in Montenegro. It's hard to imagine, you know, that any one political party can have the level of control that they did. But they did for a very long period. Now, since August 2020, there was certainly a time where it was anything but the DPS. People were voting against the DPS because they were resentful of what happened during the past 30 years, and particularly since 2006, since independence. I mentioned earlier on how many people came to perceive independence itself as a DPS project, because those within the system, those that were close to the center of the system, benefited most from the DPS being in power. Now, because of that legacy, I think you now have a different leader, you have a younger leadership. It's quite interesting. I hope none of them are watching, but they all they gesticulate like Milo Đukanović. They try and speak like Milo Đukanović. They kind of model themselves on Milo. Milo Đukanović, whether you like him, whether you are indifferent, or whether you hate him, was a very impressive political operator. You know, he survived all of this flux, the 1990s, the 2000s, wars, you know, declarations of independence and so forth. No other politician managed to survive so effectively that period and navigate these choppy waters as he did. And when you see him being interviewed today and talking about foreign policy, he still really knows what he's talking about and can still deliver that in a very effective manner. He's a professional. The problem is the brand of the DPS has now become pretty toxic. At the moment, they're unelectable. And I don't think the DPS could ever return to a situation where they are the monolithic party in Montenegro again. It just can't happen. Because actually, DPS without Milo Đukanović, I know Đukanović is in the background somewhere, but nobody is going to take over the party and be able to run it quite like Milo Đukanović did for all of those years. So I think the DPS are going to play their part, and increasingly they have an important part to play in Montenegrin politics. The DPS should be part of that system, but I think the days of monolithic political power in Montenegro are over. I think we're going to see many more coalitions, much more fragmentation. And by the way, the DPS, although they were dominant for that period, they were dominant only in coalitions with other parties. They were always relying on those coalitions to stay in power. So I think, you know, again, we have Pokret Evropa Sad, this new political party that is really forms the government now in Montenegro. That's, you know, it's an interesting group of people. They're quite young. Some would say that the project itself is not going well. Some would say that there's, you know, some promising developments there. But this is quite unique in the context of Montenegrin politics, because what you had in August 2020 was the parties who opposed DPS coming to power, and it was all a bit messy. Then Pokret Evropa Sad emerged as this new entity, and we're not really quite sure what PES or PES2, as it's dubbed now, their new policy platform, what that really looks like going forward. So there's, you know, still a lot of flux within the Montenegrin political system. There's a lot at stake. And of course, there's the next elections, I think, will be genuinely very interesting, because that anyone but DPS thing has probably gone now. And I think we're going to have a much more level playing field in the next parliamentary elections than we have in previous ones.
And you're right. And DPS has had something of a comeback. I mean, and they're in Budva. And they exceeded expectations in the last elections. So finally, then, Vesko, what about the attempted coup, the Russian alleged coup in 2016, before Montenegro joined NATO in 2017, and maybe how the NATO membership has consolidated identity in the country?
Yeah, that coup can be the coup attempt can be discussed from several angles. I will briefly touch upon one or two of them. The first, whether Russia was involved in or not involved in this coup, and what was the role of Serbia or some elements from some people from Serbian intelligence in that coup. So when it comes to Russia, I personally researched this relatively long, and then also it is part of the book and a couple of other articles published about that. You know, first of all, those Russian agents who were in charge of coordinating the activity were named. They were named by Bellingcat. And they were recognized, and so as such. So then this is one of the elements that I will use as to prove that there was something and there was a preparation for the coup. Then Patrushev, who I think everybody knows, he arrived in Belgrade just 2 days after the coup, allegedly to convince Belgrade, the government in Belgrade, to let him actually release those two guys, release them and allow them to travel to Russia. And then the third point, the US Department of Treasury disclosed several years ago their finding that Deripaska financed Montenegrin opposition in 2016. So those three elements putting together actually, in my view, proving that Russia had something to do with the coup. Interesting enough, Serbia was very cooperative in the days following the coup, but it has changed its approach to this, how time went on. So in the first days after the coup, even Serbian Prime Minister at the time, who is now President, Vučić, appeared on TV, giving press conferences, supporting the idea of the coup, providing evidence, encouraging Serbian law enforcement authorities to cooperate with Montenegro and Serbia. But as I said later, it changed. It changed with the fact that Montenegro found a couple of opposition leaders involved in the coup, and those opposition leaders were sentenced to time in prison. But those opposition leaders, in fact, are supported by Serbia and Serbian government and Serbian president. So that actually changed the narrative and the way how Serbia saw the event. Now those leaders are in power in Montenegro, and they also found this as a tool for them to be released from any, how to say, judicial prosecution regarding this event. The third layer is NATO membership, because it happened just months before formally Montenegro joined NATO. And NATO definitely being a small country in the Balkans, and in a very insecure region, and and we have discussed this at length so far, Montenegro naturally sought protection, and NATO was definitely one layer of that protection, guarantee for stability, insurance policy, call it as you like. For the future, European Union membership is another layer of protection. So, as you said, it consolidated, in fact, the idea that NATO membership is the right way to go. And there is no now setback. Montenegro cannot change this trajectory. And in 2017, as you know, we've become NATO member, though Russia, even at that point, publicly promised to actually to take measures against not just Montenegro, but other countries wishing to become NATO members.
Well, we certainly hope those measures will not ever be taken. And the only measure I hope will be taken here is your applause. And I want to note here that on this rainy day, we had this very good turnout here, and not a soul has left this. In fact, we've gained, some have joined here, and that's testament to the dynamic and illuminating conversation by our two esteemed academic guests here, Professor Vesko Garčević and Professor Kenneth Morrison. Join me in thanking them. Thank you very much.